There's a bloodline in America that doesn't talk about its daughters, not because they were forgotten, but because every single one of them disappeared at the exact same hour, midnight. Different years, different decades, same family, same fate. The Harrow family tree has a branch that stops growing every generation, and when you trace the pattern back far enough, you realize it wasn't random. It was ritual. It was expected. And the fathers knew. This isn't folklore. This isn't legend whispered around campfires. This is documented. Birth certificates that lead to nothing, census records with names crossed out in ink that wasn't there the year before, and photographs. God, the photographs where the daughters stand just slightly out of focus, as if the camera itself knew they wouldn't be there long enough to matter. The Harrow family settled in western Pennsylvania in 1823. They were wealthy landowners, respected, the kind of family that built churches and named streets after themselves. But there was something else they built too, something that didn't have a name on any deed. A stone structure at the edge of their property, half buried in the hillside, with a door that only opened once a year. And every time it opened, a daughter went inside, and she never came back out. The town knew. You don't live in a place like that for 200 years and not know. But knowing and speaking are two different things. And in America, there are families whose secrets are protected not by silence, but by something worse, agreement. An unspoken pact that what happens inside certain bloodlines stays there, even when it violates every moral law we pretend to uphold. The last documented Harrow daughter was named Eliza, born in 1981, disappeared in 1999, 3 days after her 18th birthday. The police report was filed. It was also closed within 72 hours. No investigation, no search, just a notation in the margin that read, "Family matter resolved." But Eliza wasn't resolved. She was gone. And if you dig deep enough into the Harrow estate records, you'll find something that should make your blood stop. A land transfer, a deed signed in her name, dated 2 days after she vanished. The Harrow family didn't start in Pennsylvania. They came from somewhere older, somewhere across the Atlantic where bloodlines mattered more than law, and where daughters were currency in arrangements that had nothing to do with love. There's a parish record in Cornwall, England, dated 1807, that lists a Harrow family departure. 7 members boarded a ship to America, but only 6 names appear on the manifest when they arrived in Philadelphia. The 7th was a girl, 16 years old. Her name was scratched out of the ship's log mid-voyage. No explanation, no death recorded, just a line drawn through her existence as if she'd never been born. That's where it starts, not in America, but in the old world, where families like the Harrows understood something we've tried very hard to forget. That power isn't always inherited through sons. Sometimes it's purchased, and sometimes the price is paid in daughters who never get to grow old. When the Harrows settled in Pennsylvania, they didn't integrate, they isolated. Bought 1,000 acres in a valley where the roads didn't reach and the rivers ran backward in the spring. Local histories describe them as peculiar but prosperous. They had money that didn't make sense, no trade, no business. Just wealth that appeared like clockwork every 18 years, as if the land itself paid them for something. And maybe it did, because in 1841, the first American-born Harrow daughter disappeared. Her name was Constance, 17 years old. The family held a funeral, but there was no body. Just an empty casket and a gathering of men in black who didn't cry. The local pastor wrote in his private journal, a journal that wasn't discovered until 1963, that he refused to perform the service. He wrote, "They are not mourning, they are completing something." He left town 3 weeks later and never returned. 18 years after Constance, another daughter. 18 years after that, another. The pattern held for over a century, and every time the family grew wealthier. Every time the local authorities looked the other way, because the Harrows didn't just own land. They owned influence, they owned people. And in small-town America, that's more powerful than any law ever written. But here's what makes it worse. The daughters knew. There are letters, hidden in estate sales, tucked into Bibles, folded into the walls of homes that were torn down decades ago. Letters written by Harrow daughters in the months before they turned 18. And they all say the same thing. They're not confused. They're not scared. They're resigned, as if they'd been raised their entire lives knowing this was coming. One letter dated 1893 reads, "Mother says it's an honor. Father says it's necessary. I only wish I understood what I'm paying for." There's a tax record from 1902 that nobody was supposed to see. It surfaced during a county archive digitization project in 2011, and within 6 months, it was removed from public access. But not before a genealogist in Pittsburgh made a copy. The document lists the Harrow estate's annual income, and beneath the column for source of funds, there's a single word written in faded inky: provision. Not inheritance, not agriculture, not investment. Provision, as if the money was being provided by something or someone, and the amount never changed. Every 18 years, a lump sum deposit appeared in the family's account, always the same figure, adjusted only for inflation, as if whoever was paying knew exactly what a daughter was worth in every generation. But provision for what? That's the question that eats at you when you start tracing this family's history. Because the Harrows weren't just wealthy, they were protected. In 1887, a local magistrate tried to investigate the disappearance of a Harrow daughter named Margaret. He filed a formal inquiry, requested access to the family property. 3 days later, he was found dead in his home. The official cause was heart failure. He was 34 years old. No autopsy was performed. His case files vanished, and the Harrow family attended his funeral, sitting in the front row, dressed in black, expressionless. That's how it worked. You didn't question the Harrows. Not if you wanted to keep your position. Not if you wanted your children to stay safe. And certainly not if you wanted to keep breathing. The family had reach. They had friends in state legislatures, in banking, in the kind of old money circles where favors are traded like stocks and morality is just another expense you can afford to skip. And the daughters? God, the daughters. They were raised inside this understanding. There are school records, report cards, teachers' notes, and every single one describes Harrow girls the same way: quiet, obedient, intelligent, but distant, as if they were only half present. One teacher in 1926 wrote a note to the school board expressing concern about a Harrow daughter named Clara. She wrote, "The child speaks about her 18th birthday as if it were an execution date. When I asked her why, she said, 'Because that's when I'm useful.' I don't know what that means, but it frightens me." Clara disappeared 4 months later, midnight. Just like the others, her bedroom was found untouched the next morning. Bed made, no signs of struggle, but on her desk there was a single envelope addressed to no one. Inside was a lock of her hair and a handwritten note that said, "Don't let them forget I was real." But they did forget, or they pretended to, because that's what America does best. We bury the things that don't fit the story we want to tell. We pave over the graves and build parks on top of them, and pretend the soil isn't screaming. The Harrow daughters weren't just erased, they were edited out of history, one midnight at a time, while their fathers counted money and their mothers looked away. In 1954, something broke the pattern. A Harrow daughter named Catherine turned 18 in July. Midnight came and went. She didn't disappear. For 3 days, the family stayed inside the estate. No one left, no one entered. Neighbors reported seeing lights on in every window all night long, and some claimed they heard singing, low, rhythmic, almost chant-like, coming from somewhere deep inside the property. On the 4th day, Catherine was found walking barefoot on the main road 7 miles from the house. She was alive, but she wasn't the same. The state police picked her up and brought her to a hospital. She didn't speak for 2 weeks. When she finally did, the only thing she said, over and over, was a single phrase: "They wouldn't take me." Not, "I escaped." Not, "I ran." They wouldn't take me. As if something had rejected her. The hospital records note that she had no injuries, no signs of trauma, but her hair had turned partially white at 18 years old. The doctors had no explanation. Catherine was eventually released into the custody of a distant aunt in Ohio, far from the Harrow estate. She never returned to Pennsylvania. She never married, never had children. And in 1979, she walked into Lake Erie and didn't come back. Her suicide note was 1 sentence long: "I should have gone when they wanted me." But here's what makes Catherine's story unbearable. After she failed to disappear, another Harrow daughter was born within the year. Unplanned, unexpected, as if the family needed a replacement. Her name was Alice, and 18 years later, in 1973, Alice vanished at midnight, exactly as the others had. The pattern resumed. The bloodline corrected itself, and whatever had refused Catherine got what it was owed. There's a private investigator who looked into the Harrow family in the 1980s. His name was Gordon Lyle, and he'd been hired by a distant Harrow relative who suspected something was wrong. Lyle spent 6 months digging into property records, interviewing former neighbors, tracking down anyone who'd once worked for the family. He compiled a file that was over 300 pages long, and then he stopped, completely, closed the case, refunded his client. And when the client pressed him for answers, Lyle said, "There are things in this country that aren't meant to be solved. The Harrows are one of them. If you're smart, you'll walk away." The client didn't walk away. 2 months later, his car went off a bridge in West Virginia. Mechanical failure, the report said, but the brakes had been tampered with. Lyle was questioned. He had an alibi. But in his final police statement, he said something that never made it into the official report. One of the officers who was there that day later told a journalist, Lyle looked terrified. He said, "The Harrows don't kill people. They don't have to. They just wait. And whatever they're feeding eventually does it for them." Whatever they're feeding, that phrase shows up more than once if you dig deep enough. In letters, in testimonies that were sealed, in the margins of documents that were never meant to leave the courthouse. It's always the same implication, that the Harrows weren't acting alone, that they were serving something, providing for something. And in exchange, they received wealth, protection, and silence. There's a structure on the old Harrow property that still stands. It's not on any modern map, not listed in any historical registry. But if you know where to look, and you're willing to ignore the no trespassing signs that have been there since the 1990s, you can find it. A stone building, half sunken into the hillside, with walls so thick no sound escapes. The door is iron, the lock is old, and above the threshold, carved into the stone in letters worn smooth by time, is a single word in Latin: permissio, promise. In 2003, a group of urban explorers found their way onto the property. They documented everything, took photos, filmed video, and what they found inside that structure should have made national news. But it didn't, because within 72 hours of uploading their footage online, it was scrubbed, removed from every platform, the accounts deleted. And when one of the explorers tried to re-upload, he received a cease and desist letter from a law firm in Philadelphia that specializes in estate protection. The letter didn't threaten a lawsuit. It just said, "You have seen something that does not belong to you. Forget it." But one of the explorers kept a copy. He didn't share it publicly, but he described what was inside that building to a journalist in 2009 under the condition of anonymity. He said the interior was a single room, stone floor, no windows, and along the walls there were names. Dozens of them carved into the rock, all women's names, all with birth years, and next to each name a date. The dates were all the same, midnight. Some were barely legible, worn away by time. Others were fresh, recent, and at the far end of the room, there was a descending staircase. He said they didn't go down. He said they couldn't, because the air that came up from below wasn't cold. It was warm, and it smelled like something living. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have run? Or would you have tried to break the pattern, knowing it might cost you everything? The Harrow estate was sold in 2007. The family name disappeared from public records shortly after. No forwarding address, no probate filings. Just gone. The property was purchased by a private trust based in Delaware, one of those legal entities that exists only on paper with no identifiable owners. The land was rezoned, declared a conservation easement, permanently closed to the public. And that stone structure, it's still there, protected, preserved, as if something still considers it sacred. But the daughters didn't stop. That's the thing people don't realize. The Harrow family may have scattered, but the bloodline didn't end. There are women alive today who carry Harrow DNA, women who don't know the name, who were adopted out, who were born from affairs, from secret second families, from daughters who escaped before their 18th birthday and changed their names and tried to start over. And some of them have reported the same thing. A feeling, a pull, something that wakes them up at midnight every midnight in the weeks leading up to their 18th birthday. A voice that isn't a voice, a presence that isn't quite there, calling them home.